Frida Kahlo's life was a sweeping canvas drenched in both heartbreak and raw determination, a story so intense that it blurred the boundaries between agony and triumph. Polio struck her at the age of 6, reducing her right leg and confining her to her room for months. A tragic bus accident during her teens shattered her dreams of becoming a doctor, leaving her bedridden for a year. Yet it was in that quiet isolation that Frida's great reckoning arrived. Given a brush and some paint, she transformed pain into color, trauma into creation, forging a path no one could have foreseen. She once said that her paintings were not fantasies, but relentless truths. At 6 years old, when polio first arrived in her life, Frida's world shrank to the walls of her room. Confined by the disease, she imagined friends who danced silently by her bedside. For 9 months, she was cut off from the robust chaos of childhood. Other children roamed the streets while Frida watched them through a window, her weak right leg wrapped in bandages. She quietly loathed being singled out for her limp, but quickly learned the power of a sharp tongue to ward off cruelty. Where other children might retreat, Frida stood her ground, using anger and wit as armor. Her father, Guillermo, understood her restless spirit. He introduced her to photography, letting her accompany him on shoots so that her eyes might roam beyond the limitations of her body. He also encouraged her to engage in sports considered unladylike in Mexico at the time: boxing, wrestling, swimming, anything that would strengthen her muscles and fend off the dreaded pity of the outside world. The cruelty of classmates calling her Peg League Frida only fueled her refusal to be defined by an ailment. During these early years, a revolution rattled Mexico from within, toppling the old regime and birthing new ideologies that would transform the nation's identity. Frida liked to say that she was born in 1910, the beginning of the revolution, though her official birth year was 1907. She sought to bind herself to the upheaval that shaped her country, feeling the weight of bullets whizzing past her window and absorbing stories of revolutionaries fighting in the streets. Chaos surrounded her family life too. Her mother, Matilda, was a devout Catholic with a steely determination, a formidable matriarch who fought for the family's finances by haggling fiercely in the marketplace. While mother and daughter often clashed, Frida treasured her father's calm presence. He had epilepsy, and young Frida learned to guide him through seizures with a steady hand. He in turn delighted in her curiosity and intelligence. She was the child he believed had the greatest understanding of life's complexities, and with his camera in hand he captured images of her that became talismans of her metamorphosis. After all, even as a child, Frida was a swirl of contradictions, quiet yet rebellious, fragile yet fierce, sensitive yet brimming with wicked humor. Her attendance at the National Preparatory School in Mexico City at 14 was a jolt of energy. That institution pulsed with debate, art, and activism, drawing in some of the nation's brightest minds and revolutionaries. Frida joined a ragtag group of student pranksters who combined intellectual pursuits with outlandish stunts. They once set off firecrackers in a courtyard just to watch the professors scatter, but beneath the mischief lay a burning appetite for books and ideals. They had no problem challenging tradition and authority. It was here that Frida first locked eyes with Diego Rivera, a man painting a mural high above the school's courtyard, huge in stature, confident as a general. In that moment, Frida saw not just the artist, but the will behind him, the kind of unstoppable force that seemed to come from the center of the earth. According to her own recollection, she once stole a snack from Diego's lunch as a prank, which he found more amusing than insulting. Their paths would cross again, but in those days, She was enthralled by books, friends, and a growing sense that life was bigger than the confines of a classroom. At 17, Frida had a blossoming romance with Alejandro Gomez Arias, a charismatic leader of her group of friends. They planned to escape to the United States to build a life far from parental disapproval, writing playful letters full of extravagant plans. But life always had different designs for Frida Kahlo. On September 17, 1925, everything changed. Frida and Alejandro boarded a bus that collided with a streetcar in a horrifying accident. Frida's body was pierced by a steel handrail, breaking her spine, pelvis, and multiple ribs. Thrown among the wreckage, covered in gold dust that belonged to another passenger, Frida looked like a broken statue sprinkled with glitter. Witnesses called her La Ballerina because in their stunned confusion they thought she resembled a dancer coated in gold leaf. Doctors believed she would die, but through sheer force of will, Frida survived. Long months of convalescence followed. Encased in plaster corsets and barely able to move, she endured unimaginable pain and isolation. Her mirror became her closest ally. She'd stare at her reflection, this battered young woman with fierce eyes, and she'd paint. She painted because she was bored, because she needed an outlet, because her body felt like a prison. Her father's set of oil paints became a lifeline. I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, she said, because I am the person I know best. Those early works revealed an artist unafraid to confront suffering on the canvas. Emotions that had no place in conversation found expression in color and shape, every brushstroke an exorcism. While her relationship with Alejandro gradually disintegrated under the weight of her injuries, his visits grew less frequent and her letters became more desperate. Her bond with her painting tools solidified. When she finally emerged from her bedroom, the rest of the world looked different. She limped more pronouncedly now, hiding the discrepancy in her legs under long skirts, but her spirit sharpened like a finely honed blade. A chance meeting with the artist Diego Rivera took place again in 1927, when Frida brought her paintings for him to critique. She marched right up to him with unwavering directness and demanded that he tell her whether she was talented or wasting her time. Diego was startled by her audacity, but he looked closely and recognized her raw brilliance. Though he was already a celebrated painter, revered for his massive murals highlighting the struggles of workers and indigenous people, he became instantly fascinated by her unique vision. She teased him, saying she suspected he used compliments to seduce other women. Diego laughed, enthralled by her wit. Their connection flared up like a fire that refused to be smothered. She was diminutive beside him, but her presence could hush an entire room. Diego kept returning to her family home in Coyoacán, where she lived within walls painted a bright cobalt blue that seemed to reflect her rebellious soul. They married on August 21st, 1929, a union her parents called the wedding of an elephant and a dove. Guillermo, Frida's father, warned Diego that Frida would always be sick and that she was neither wealthy nor a classic beauty. None of it mattered to Diego. He craved her vitality, intelligence, and unmatched humor. At their wedding celebration, Diego got into a drunken confrontation with a guest, injuring the man's finger while Frida fled in tears. It foreshadowed the storms to come. Their early married life was a study in extremes. They shared a home in Mexico City stuffed with artifacts of Diego's political obsessions and Frida's romantic flourishes. The place buzzed with revolutionaries, artists, and exiles. Diego was at once supportive and overshadowing. He bragged to everyone that Frida was more talented than he was, even as she sacrificed her own comfort to travel with him and nurse him back to health when needed. Frida suffered her first miscarriage in 1930. a devastating blow that shredded her emotionally. She was in the United States at the time, accompanying Diego on various mural commissions in places like San Francisco and Detroit. Although she loathed many aspects of the gringo world, its industrial worship, its wealth disparities, she still tried to see beauty in everything. Diego, enthralled by the potential of industrial progress, sometimes missed how alienated and lonely his wife felt abroad. In 1932, she was pregnant again in Detroit. Her body fought her relentlessly, and she suffered a traumatic miscarriage that she later depicted in her painting Henry Ford Hospital, also known as the Flying Bed. She represented herself naked, bleeding, tethered to symbols of her shattered motherhood, a dead fetus, a snail for the slow torture of her miscarriage, a pelvic bone, a hothouse orchid. It was a brutally honest visualization of physical and emotional agony. People found it shocking, perhaps forgetting that honesty was Frida's default mode. Despite the heartbreak, she forced herself to keep painting, to keep wrestling with her feelings on every canvas. Back in Mexico, Frida wrestled with Diego's serial infidelities. He thought nothing of having multiple lovers, once claiming it was his right as a radical to live unbound by bourgeois notions of fidelity. This cut Frida deeply, but their arguments often ended with tears and reconciliations. "I suffered 2 great accidents in my life," she once said. "One in which a bus knocked me down. The other was Diego." Still, she couldn't leave him. When he betrayed her with her own sister, Christina, the hurt was nearly unbearable. She cut her hair short in an act of emotional protest, a heartbreak so profound it seeped into her paintings with savage clarity. Their relationship grew volatile, but an unspoken tether always pulled them back together. Even as she flung harsh words at him, calling him an overgrown frog or a baby, Frida could not fully tear herself away. Diego, torn between his self-indulgent philandering and genuine admiration for his wife's brilliance, would return with grand apologies. He'd present cartloads of flowers, scrawled love notes, and pleas for forgiveness until she agreed reluctantly to keep walking beside him. In the mid-1930s, she began to explore her own desires beyond the confines of marriage. Frida was openly bisexual in a society that often whispered about such things behind closed doors. She took both men and women as lovers, partly for fulfillment, partly to reclaim the autonomy she felt Diego had stolen from her. Diego, for all his own affairs, fumed when Frida was involved with other men. Her flirtations with women he dismissed more casually, as though it was less threatening. There was a famous night he discovered her with a male lover and reportedly forced the poor man to leap from a window to avoid being shot. Frida shrugged off these jealous fits, unwilling to surrender the new sense of empowerment she found in living life boldly, on her own terms. By 1937, their home became a refuge for Leon Trotsky, the exiled Soviet revolutionary. Diego, a communist sympathizer, maneuvered tirelessly to secure asylum for Trotsky in Mexico. Trotsky and his wife Natalia stayed with Frida and Diego, protected within the walls of their famous house in Coyoacan. An affair blossomed briefly between Frida and Trotsky. She found his intellectual fervor irresistible, and he was enchanted by her charm and directness. Yet she saw it mostly as a playful rebellion. Once Trotsky moved on, Frida gave him a parting gift, a self-portrait in which she presents herself poised in an elegant Tijuana outfit, dedicating the painting to him with affectionate ambiguity. Their dalliance ended quietly, overshadowed by the great political maelstrom swirling around the world. Meanwhile, Frida's reputation as an artist was growing. She had always seen her art as a personal statement of truth, never labeling herself as a surrealist. When André Breton, a leading figure in the surrealist movement, visited Mexico, He was stunned by her work, declaring it the epitome of what surrealism aspired to be. Frida rolled her eyes at the idea that her painting could be merely an exercise in dream logic. She insisted her canvases showed reality, not fantasy. Yet Breton's praise opened doors. She exhibited in New York in 1938, where the influential gallery owner Julian Levy hosted her first solo show. She arrived wearing her flamboyant dresses, flower crowns woven into her braids, vibrant shawls that defied the conservative American fashion scene. Critics and celebrities flocked to see her paintings, small in size but colossal in emotional impact. While some viewers found her imagery disturbing or even grotesque, others were entranced by the raw beauty. Time magazine dubbed her a ribbon wrapped around a bomb, capturing her capacity to charm and disquiet simultaneously. In 1939, Breton invited her to Paris. What should have been a triumphant unveiling of her work turned to frustration when the exhibition was poorly organized, and her paintings were stuck in customs for days. Marcel Duchamp intervened to salvage the show. Frida found the European intelligentsia grating, calling them decadent and out of touch. Though the Louvre acquired one of her works for its collection, she was unimpressed by what she called the empty chatter of self-styled artistic revolutionaries. Her scathing critique of Paris left no doubt she was unimpressed by surrealist gatherings, where people sipped wine and discussed vague theories while the world verged on war. She was more moved by the plight of Spanish Civil War refugees, regarding Parisian salons as frivolous in the face of looming catastrophe. Frida's marriage to Diego collapsed in 1939, culminating in a divorce that left her spiraling into despair. She produced The Two Fridas, a monumental depiction of her double self seated side by side, one wearing European-style garb, the other dressed in traditional Mexican attire. Each figure has an exposed heart, connected by a single artery that bleeds onto a white dress. It was symbolic of her schism, her heartbreak, her unstoppable love for Diego. In the midst of divorce, her health faltered again. But ironically, that year also sharpened her identity. She learned to rely on her own creativity as a lifeline, becoming more politically outspoken and personally liberated. Diego, for his part, claimed that their legal separation was more of a necessity than a reflection of hatred, stating that Frida deserved better than an aging man with complicated political baggage. Still, they drifted back to each other in 1940 and remarried. This time, Frida insisted on living on her own terms, refusing to let their union eclipse her selfhood. The 1940s brought her a measure of public recognition, but unrelenting physical suffering. Frida's spine and leg required multiple surgeries, her right foot ulcerated to the point of near gangrene, and her doctors strapped her into hideous corsets meant to ease the pain. She endured months of convalescence in hospitals, painting from bed whenever possible. With brush in hand, she transformed antiseptic wards into windows of color. In The Broken Column, she showed herself split open, her spine replaced by a fractured ionic column, nails studded across her skin. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her eyes remained unflinching, demanding the viewer to witness her anguish without looking away. Despite her vulnerability, Frida remained passionately engaged in the cultural and political world. She taught at La Esmeralda, forming a small circle of students whom she called Los Fridos, guiding them not just in technique, but in forging an art that was honest and personal. She took pride in the extravagance of her clothing, especially her elaborate Tehuana dresses, which she wore as acts of cultural and personal defiance. Underneath the skirts and ribbons, though, was a fragile body braced by medical supports. She told visitors that the color and splendor of her outfits kept the world from seeing her pain. Her father's death in 1941 shook her deeply. Guillermo had been her staunchest ally, the man who believed in her brilliance long before the world did. She found solace in her paintings, one of which she described as an homage to his unwavering courage. Her diaries from the period reveal her desperation for stability, her regrets, her lingering heartbreak over her miscarriages, and her simmering devotion to Diego. That devotion was tested again and again, but it never vanished. She depicted him on her canvases, sometimes in miniature, perched on her forehead like an inescapable demon lover. Diego remained both anchor and burden, at once the source of her greatest pain and the cure for her loneliness. Leon Trotsky's assassination in Mexico in 1940 brought chaos once more. Diego was suspected, at least for a time, which forced him into hiding. Frida was interrogated for hours. Though she was cleared, the ordeal rattled her, underscoring the dangerous entanglement of art, politics, and personal relationships that seemed to follow her everywhere. In the swirl of suspicion, Diego and Frida found themselves ironically drawn back to each other, seeking mutual solace. It was a cycle they never broke, wounding one another, then frantically trying to heal. When Frida's health plummeted in 1950, her leg showed signs of gangrene. She had endless fevers, infections from spinal fusions, and abscesses that seeped through her corsets. Nurses found her drenched in sweat and struggling to breathe. She still found moments to laugh, using salty language to shock them out of their pity. Visitors would sometimes recoil from the sight of her wounds, which smelled of rot. Frida called it the stench of death and insisted on turning her medical appliances, a wheelchair, a specialized bed, into props for her jokes. She painted on her casts and braces, covering them with bright designs, phrases, and images. It was her way of defying the clinical gloom that threatened to swallow her. By 1953, as pneumonia gnawed at her, she was bedridden more often than not. Yet when Lola Alvarez Bravo, a pioneering gallerist, proposed a solo exhibition of Frida's work in Mexico City, she was determined to attend, doctor's orders be damned. The night of the opening, crowds packed the sidewalk outside the gallery, buzzing with anticipation. An ambulance delivered Frida on a stretcher, which was carried inside. She insisted on greeting admirers from a bed placed in the center of the gallery, the walls alive with her paintings, some as small as the palm of a hand, yet colossal in emotional magnitude. Skeletons dangled above her bed like comedic guardians, offering a mockery of mortality. Tequila and laughter flowed in equal measure. She led the singing of folk songs from her pillow, visitors pressed in tight, tears shining in their eyes. It felt like a final triumph. The world now recognized the genius of Frida Kahlo in her own country, celebrating her with the adoration she had always craved and richly deserved. Shortly after the exhibition, her health entered a steep decline. Infection after infection racked her body. Doctors eventually amputated part of her right leg to stop the gangrene. Frida tried to boost her own morale by decorating a prosthetic boot with red embroidery and tiny bells that jangled as she moved. For a brief time it gave her a spark, but the pain never left. It merely changed shapes. She wrote in her diary that she contemplated death daily, that the constant operations and restrictions were torture beyond expression. Still, she found small joys. She would entertain guests, share jokes with nurses, and pen savage commentaries about politics and religion. She clung to her sense of humor, even when it veered into gallows territory. Her devotion to Diego persisted, and despite all the betrayals and heartbreak, he was at her side as if tethered by an unseen cosmic thread. On July 13th, 1954, at 47 years old, Frida slipped away. Some suspected she facilitated her own passing with an overdose of medication. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism. She had scribbled in her diary a few days before, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her body was placed in a modest coffin and taken to the Palace of Fine Arts for a final farewell. Thousands of mourners flooded the streets, holding vigil for the woman who had become a national symbol of fierce endurance. Diego, broken with grief, hovered near her coffin, whispering that he felt as though he'd lost his better half. He wanted their ashes to be mixed one day, but that wish was never realized. Instead, her remains were placed in a pre-Columbian urn, which still rests in the Blue House, now a museum visited by admirers from all over the world. Frida's paintings outlived her suffering, offering a kaleidoscope of color, ferocity, and grace. Like the precarious images in the two Fridas, she remains dual and complex, fragile yet unbreakable, battered yet defiant, playful yet burdened by sorrow. Over the years, she has become an icon, revered as much for her artistry as for her resilience. She was never merely the wife of Diego Rivera. Instead, she forged a creative universe that placed her at the center, demanding to be seen in all her wounded, radiant splendor. Today, her paintings draw enormous crowds, and her face is printed on everything from postcards to political posters. She resonates with people who recognize that from great suffering can come transcendent beauty. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the secret life of Frida Kahlo. Let us know who you'd like to see next and share your thoughts on Frida's indomitable spirit. Frida's life may have been scarred by tragedy, but her legacy stands as a beacon of passionate defiance, an enduring testament to the power of living fully, without flinching, no matter the odds.